Now, I just made $200,000 putting less work into place, twice as much as when I was putting $500,000 worth of work in place. What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another midweek Modern Craftsman. Today, we are going to be talking about pricing expectations and how they start before the first call. This is the topic that we covered on the main podcast. I'm also going to be giving you my own spin on it for my company, my business. I know a lot of people who listen here are those smaller contractors, smaller builders, owner-operators, some bags on, maybe 1 or 2 employees, maybe a dozen employees. I guess we run the gamut here. But I want to talk about how this relates to me, how this relates to my business, how I've evolved over the years. So that's what we are going to dig into today. So last week on the podcast, if you recall, Nick and I talked about how as builders we can get trapped by ballpark pricing and how that early number can end up following you, your business, that project for months. So what I want to get into today is what happens prior to that conversation starting, or if that conversation starts, what's the next step? Or how are you using ballpark to set yourself up for success and not pigeonhole yourself? So I learned this the hard way, and I realized after many, many years that by the time the client was coming to me for a price, the expectation had already been set. They had an idea of what I was going to cost. They had an idea if they were just shopping me. They probably had an idea of whether they actually wanted to use me or not based on certain parameters. So I realized that this was a marketing problem, this was a branding problem, a language problem, and I did some things to change that, and we're going to dig into that today. So early on when I started my business, I was obviously performing the work. I was doing the accounting, the bookkeeping, the design, the coordination, the supervision, and also the marketing and the estimating, everything. I mean, I'm still doing a lot of it, but I was truly doing everything. I was doing the work during the day. I wasn't getting paid for any of the back end work that I was doing at night. I was giving free estimates. I was visiting every single client who called me, every job that came across my plate, and I was providing them with free estimates, sometimes design ideas, with the hopes that that was going to be the leverage that I needed to land the project. That, as well as just being cheap, right? Like the cheapest price is going to get the job, and that was the mentality that I had, and really how I thought that everyone was getting jobs. I was deathly afraid to give a number that would be more expensive than someone else. And I've come a long way. I hope that I am expensive. I hope that I am not bottom of the barrel. I hope that I am maximizing what I can make on projects and getting paid with a reflection of the value and the product and the process that I'm providing. So I noticed early on that I was just providing free service, right? My clients wanted a number, they were comparing me, they were shopping me, and the goal for me was to be as cheap as possible, to constantly sharpen my pencil and make my number better and better and less so that I would get hired to do the job, because in my mind, that was how I was going to land the job. I was going to be compared to others, and I had to either be hired because I was the same price, but I offered a little better of a product, or I just had to be less money. So I was always working on adjusting and bettering my pricing rather than focusing on the positioning that I was taking within the market. And had I had focused more so on my positioning and less on the pricing, I would have been able to progress much faster in business. But I didn't know that. You don't know what you don't know. And I had to make a lot of mistakes and learn a lot of hard lessons along the way. So I guess at this point, I've been in business 16, 17 years, 16 years. For the first 7, 8 years, I was being compared. I was being treated as a commodity-based contractor because that was who I was. I wasn't differentiating. I wasn't focusing on my systems. I wasn't focusing on vetting. I wasn't focusing on how to market and brand myself with regard to value. It was all price-based. So I was using my work and my execution and my process and my care to land jobs, but I was still being shopped. I was still landing commodity-based jobs. I wasn't using those 3 attributes to land jobs while I was more expensive. So I had to figure out how to do that. So there were a handful of signals that I had no idea I was sending, but I was. So I did everything. I still do everything, but I don't really have an explanation for why I do everything. So I had to do a better job of explaining why we choose to self-perform as much. And it's not to offer a competitive advantage, which for a long time it was. And that's what was pitched to my clients, and that's what that was the service that I provided. So I didn't ever dig into my process enough. Nothing really was differentiating me when you think of price. So I felt that I was doing a good job marketing myself, what I was doing, my process with execution, but I couldn't find a way to translate that into landing the job for more money. It was just in an effort to land the job. The same thing when I started implementing pre-con. It was a differentiator, but it wasn't a differentiator with more money. It was just a way to land the job and offer more value at the same price point. And that was the signal that I was selling. That's what all of my marketing, all of my branding, my website, all the conversations I was having with clients were just offering more. I was offering more than the other person at the same price point. That was my angle. That's what I was selling. So I had to find a way to begin to understand how to pitch and angle myself differently, right? How was I going to offer more value while charging more money? What type of branding did I need to put in place? What type of marketing? What type of systems did I need to have to be able to land these projects at a higher price point, regardless of how much more, how much less I was offering? How would I position myself to sell value rather than price? So there's some things that I just had to stop doing. I had to stop giving free estimates. I had a conversation with Mike, a friend of mine, and he said, why don't you just tell clients that you're not going to competitively bid projects? And at this point, it was maybe 8, 9 years into business, and I had that was a different language to me. It didn't make any sense. I had no idea how I would do that. And then I started thinking, and obviously I was afraid to tell clients that. I was afraid to tell leads that. I was afraid that I was going to close the door on opportunities that were potential leads. What I didn't realize is the sooner that I figured that out, the sooner I would progress in business, and I would stop the bleeding, and I would end the path that I was on, which really wasn't a path. Like I was just stagnant. I was doing the same thing over and over again. I was struggling and I was treading water, but I wasn't really progressing. So I had to find a system that allowed me and afforded me an opportunity to get away from competitively bidding jobs. And when I did that, so much more came from that. But I had to start creating the branding and the marketing and the language and the communication behind why I refused to competitively bid jobs. And I started questioning, how does this serve me? How is this serving my clients? How is this protecting my clients? What type of value is this providing for me as a business, for the rest of the industry, and for my clients? And when I started thinking about that, and when I started understanding how this really isn't serving anyone, how this really isn't protecting anyone, and how this is a race to the bottom, I started to understand what I needed to do. I didn't know how I'd implement it, but I started to understand what I needed to do to move in that direction. I had to understand my numbers better. I had to understand these ballpark figures that we discussed in last week's podcast, to understand fit for clients, to understand what my baseline was for jobs, and to begin the conversation with these clients that would set myself up for paid pre-construction, that would set myself up for job site visits or estimates in person or a phone call or whatever it may be that would consume my time while trying to protect it as much as possible. So I had to develop systems that would ensure I was marketing towards the correct clients, that I was attracting the right clients, that I had a funnel that was capturing the right clients and then distilling them down to my ideal client, the ideal lead, the ideal type of project. All of this while not providing them with a number up front. So like we discussed the ballpark, Nick and I discussed this on the main podcast, that for me is a barrier to entry, right? My kitchens start in this range. So I can make sure that that client fits within that range. They can move in deeper to that funnel, but it's still, there's a lot more information that needs to be gathered before I can classify that as a legitimate, viable lead. So what are some of the things that I did that I integrated and implemented into my business to be able to do that? So I want to preface this by saying this was nowhere near perfect. I'm still evolving the process over the past 7-8 years. I'm still continuing to learn. I'm still continuing to grow. I'm still changing things, but it's an evolution. I'm not looking for perfection. I'm looking for progress. So the first thing I had to do was I had to understand that I couldn't lead with price anymore. That couldn't be the main motivator for my clients to call me or for me to be selling a project. So what I needed to sell again was value. So those first interactions with clients, the intake form, the email, the phone call, I needed to discuss scope. I needed to discuss my client's priorities, my client's program, the potential constraints of the job, what would drive the cost of a job like this. The conversation revolving around price was intentionally moved later. It wasn't moved so far down that I'd have to invest a ton of time prior to getting there, but it wasn't the first thing that I was concerned about. The ballpark got him in the door, right? You said you want a $150,000 kitchen. I can do a kitchen and make money for $100,000. I still don't have enough information to understand what your expectation is, what your needs are, what your program is, what this job entails. But that's the first barrier to entry that allows me to spend a little bit more time on you without feeling that I'm just, giving away time for free. So that's just a vetting tool. So I need to discuss scope, program, job constraints, cost drivers. So another shift that I focused on, and this was communication with clients, but this was also marketing and branding, is explaining the why of everything that I do. The why of my budget ranges, the why I use pre-construction, the why it takes so long to develop an accurate scope, schedule, budget. I needed to discuss not only the why of our process and our execution, but the why of our business. Why do I do things the way I do? Why do I not just want to provide you a number? Why do I not want to throw a budget out there shooting off the hip that's going to anchor you emotionally to that? Why should you pay me for pre-construction? Why do I start the conversation with a range of prices? Why am I doing what I'm doing to protect you, to protect my business, to protect my time, to protect your time? Once I started explaining this process, rather than focusing on defending my price, the tone of every conversation, the tone of every lead, the interactions with my potential clients changed. So I want to make note that the ballparks, they don't disappear. They didn't disappear. I just used them differently. They were no longer this emotional anchor for projects or for potential leads. They are used more so as a tool to gauge and vet a client to make sure that I'm not just wasting time or throwing my time at a lead or a project that's never going to pan out. So what I noticed when I did this is that my clients, what I was afraid of, right, is that I was going to say, hey, you know what? You want this job? I've done projects from $70,000 to $150,000 for that type of project. And I thought that would scare clients away. I thought that those clients would anchor themselves to that $70,000, but they didn't. When I explained why and what type of job looks like a $70,000 versus $150,000, when I explained why, I started to instill and build trust in them. But they also didn't tie themselves to the low number because they realized what made up that low number and that some of their needs and some of their wants may not tie them to the lower end of the spectrum. I also realized that my clients, as we moved through pre-construction, as they made decisions, as we refined design, as we went through multiple pricing exercises, realized that my clients weren't hanging on to, but you said it was going to be this much. They understood my process. They understood that they were making all of the decisions that drove the price of the project. I was just leading them down that path. So they were never saying, well, you said it was going to cost this much, because they're understanding the impacts of the decisions that they're making and that it may or may not increase the price. It may maintain budget. They may concede something elsewhere to upgrade on another aspect of that job. So they're deciding what this job costs. They also understood at this point that in order to protect them, in order to protect their investment, in order to protect what they want to spend, their budget, their program on this project, the pre-construction process felt logical for them. What I would do differently if I were doing this all over, if I were starting my business today, some of the things that I do now that I would do differently. And this is meant to be very tactical advice, just something that you guys can implement. You can take hold of this and you can begin to understand how to put this in your business today. My website would be a clear explanation of how I work. Short, concise, to the point. I would be less worried about creating this massive funnel to bring everyone in, and I would use my website as a vetting tool for clients to self-qualify. I would want them, if they didn't know who I was, to be able to go onto my website and say, this is the type of contractor that he is. This is who we want to work for. Or work with, not work for. I would also have an explanation on there or through my social or create branding that explained how pricing evolves, what dictates the cost of projects, how my process allows clients to control the overall budget of their own project. As far as my intake goes, I would not allow people to hop on a phone call with me, schedule a meeting with me without having proper context or information from them. For years, I would go and meet every client. I would get on a phone call. I would go back and forth 20 emails with this client only for them to go hire somebody else because they could do it for less money. So I would no longer concede time to clients that had not gone through some sort of vetting sequence. I also would not provide clients really with much insight as far as budget goes, other than a high level range to make sure that they're within my ideal client or my ideal job profile, that they fit within that. But I would not give that much insight to budgetary information without making sure that it was a viable lead. Because so many times I would give people numbers, I would provide them with the number, and then they would anchor that, and they would make their decision on me based on that number without any actual information that could explain that number. I could tell somebody, or somebody could tell me that they want to spend $30,000 on a bathroom, and I could say I can make money doing a bathroom for $30,000, but I have not, like, that has to be a 3-piece. It has to be a remodel. I can't be moving fixtures. I can't be doing super high-end finishes. We can't have floor-to-ceiling tile throughout the entire bathroom. There's certain constraints that make a $30,000 bathroom profitable for me. I can use that to vet that client and get them in the door, but I can't use that to continue that conversation and prolong that conversation without gaining more information for them. If that client tells me that they want to relocate all of the fixtures, that they want to blow a wall out and borrow some area from a closet next door, that they want a walk-in steam shower, they want a curbless shower, all of these things make this $30,000 bathroom unreasonable. But without explanation, without gaining more information from these clients during the intake process, I wouldn't know that. So I would not invest that much time into these clients without having them go through a intake process that better vets them and ensures that they are fit for me. For my content, I would talk about the decisions that are made on a project and not just the results of the project. And I still do this. I show the finished result of a project, and I do not properly communicate how these decisions affected the overall cost of that job. So people will see a job that looks beautiful, they consider it just like every other job. How much does that cost? Oh, that's way more than I anticipated. I didn't do a good job of explaining the decisions that were made that impacted that job significantly. So I would make sure that my content did a good job of communicating how each decision or how each process affected the overall budget and financial constraints of that project. I've realized that I probably don't need better sales skill. I just need to make sure that my signals within my sales are clearer and do a better job of creating content around that. Another thing that you all can focus on, and something that was so scary for me for so long, was allowing myself permission to repel bad fitting clients or bad fitting projects. It took me a really long time to understand and be okay with the fact that every client is not my client. That's a really scary notion. Being shopped by clients is not flattering. That's not a quality lead. That's not something to get excited about. And that fewer calls can actually be better. It probably is indicative of a proper marketing plan when you have less calls, but the caliber of call is better. So I do a fair amount of consulting with a lot of people listening to this podcast, so thank you if you signed up. If you are interested in signing up, you can shoot me an email, tyler@trghomeconcepts.com. It's first come, first serve. I do have repeat consulting clients, but if you're looking to get on the list or you need something answered or something immediate, I could probably get you on. But it is first come, first serve. So if you're interested, shoot me an email. I'll explain how it works. But I tell them all the time, and this is something that was, it doesn't make sense to you until you do it, but I can make more money by doing less. The less I do, the more I make. And people told me that early on. It didn't make sense to me. I couldn't wrap my head around it. And maybe you can't either, but maybe I can help you see this a little bit better. When I tried to stop serving every client in every market and be the affordable option to everyone, I started sounding valuable to the right people. I started pricing jobs accurately. I started creating marketing and projects that were shaped towards my ideal client, towards my ideal project. Let's just throw numbers out there. I could do $500,000 worth of work in a year. And what if it costs me $400,000 to put that work in place? So I'm walking away with $100,000. What if I did that same $500,000 worth of work, but it was for better clients? They were better jobs. They were more profitable jobs. They were jobs that I was able to charge more for an hourly rate, that I was able to execute to a higher standard, that I was able to have higher markups on jobs. And that $500,000 of work only cost me $350,000 to put in place. So no, I just made an extra $50,000, 50% more than I made the year before, and I didn't do more work because I opened the door to opportunities, to projects that made me more money, even though I potentially did the same amount of sales volume. Now, what if you continue to go down that path and you continue to create systems and build processes that create more efficiency with those same type of jobs? Now, what if I can put $400,000 worth of work into place and I can execute that so much quicker because I understand the job, I understand the market, I understand what I'm doing, I've refined my systems, and it only costs me $200,000 worth of resources to put that work in place. Now, I just made $200,000 putting less work into place, twice as much as when I was putting $500,000 worth of work in place. Now, obviously, those are just numbers. They're just hypotheticals, but I did see real changes like that with my business. When I stopped chasing leads, when I stopped forcing projects, when I stopped convincing clients of what they wanted, and I started focusing on what works for me and then having clients come to me because they see what I do, I was able to do work at a higher margin. I was able to increase my profit, and there's two things you can do. You could work more. I could continue to work the 80-hour weeks, or I could work less. I could work 40-hour weeks, and I can make the same amount of money. So maybe I'm not profiting more. Maybe my take-home isn't any more than it was 7 years ago, but I'm working 30, 40, 50% less. And that's because I said no. That's because I stopped perpetuating the jobs that weren't making me money. That's because I drew a hard line in the sand. I changed my systems. I got paid for planning. I got paid for pre-construction. I moved to time and material. I understood my numbers better. I reduced my overhead. I created better systems to save me time and create efficiency. And I found the clients that want this, that want me. So now I do more work, or I do less work than I have 10 years ago, and I'm making considerably more money. And it's a really great tool and a really great way to leverage your time and your resources as a small business. Nick and I spoke about this on the main podcast, but we're so many people that I talk with, so many of my consulting clients, so many people that I have conversations with offline, their goal to make more money is just to sell more work. And if you're not making the money that you need to right now, why do you think that selling more of that same type of work is going to make any difference? If you do 2x what you're doing, you're not going to make 2x more. All of your inputs are going to go up. You probably don't have the systems in place, so you're going to actually make lower margins because there's more waste, there's more fluff, there's less efficiency, there's more do-overs, more callbacks. You're making less money on that second X of work that you're putting in place than the first X. So why not, instead of saying, hey, you know what, we're going to do 50% more work next year, why don't you say, hey, we're going to do the same amount of work, and we're going to step back, and we're going to focus on leaning the business out, creating systems, creating processes, creating efficiency, and finding the clients that we can charge more money and make the margins that we need to and stop competing, stop selling price. And all of this starts from the outset. It starts from that initial ballpark, and then what's next, right? You brought them into the funnel. They passed the first test. They jumped the first hurdle. Now, what's next? Is your marketing, is your branding, is your website, is your social all leading them down a road that aligns with the expectations of your company? Do you even understand what those expectations are for yourself? So the pricing expectations with clients are starting long before that first call, long before that first form that they're submitting to your website. You need to do a better job of aligning your ballpark with the next 2-3 steps of bringing that client into your lead intake system, whatever that looks like. You need to make sure that you are not selling a commodity-based business unless that's how you make money. There's certain lines of work out there. There's certain trades. There's certain businesses that, yes, you're a commoditized business. But for most of us small business owners, we're not doing the volume to justify the commoditized business. If I asked you today, you could do half the amount of work that you did last year and made the same amount, would you do it? Everyone would say yes. You're never going to get there being a commoditized or a commodity-based business. We're all small businesses. I would venture to say that anyone listening to this is probably not a massive, does not own or run a massive business. In residential construction, we're almost all small businesses in the grand scheme of things. You know, we don't have 1,000 employees. We don't have 20,000 employees. We have 1, 2, 10, 40. They're all small businesses. All of this is based around pre-construction, signing jobs, getting paid for planning, getting paid value, being a value-based contractor, not a price-based contractor. All of these things are easier when you set expectations early. So I want to wrap this with telling you guys and you girls, if pricing conversations feel hard right now, don't just look at what you're saying on that call. Look at what your business is saying before you ever pick up the phone. If you understand your business, if you understand what makes you money, if you understand what type of jobs, what type of client are right for you, then having that pricing conversation on the call is not going to be difficult. It's very black and white. You're not going to be emotionally distressed because you told a client something, or you said yes to a client, or you feel the need to take this job because you need to keep the lights on, when you understand that job's going to cost you money, or that there's other projects out there that are better fit. So when you understand that, and when you understand how to market yourself for those clients, and that those type of leads are going to come across your plate, is just going to take time, that conversation on the phone with these clients is going to be way less difficult. That's going to wrap up today's midweek. As always, I hope that you all enjoyed it. I hope that you enjoy the new structure where we have the main podcast, and then I'm tying this into my own business and what my businesses look like over the past 15 years, and how those conversations and those topics that we're covering on the main podcast translate specifically to me and my business. I hope this is helpful for you. If you have insight, feedback, if you want to hop on a consulting call, if you have questions, if you have something that you want addressed on the podcast, shoot me an email, tyler@trghomeconcepts.com or hello@moderncraftsman.co. And I appreciate all the support. Appreciate you guys hanging around, following along. If you need anything, reach out to me. If not, I'll catch you next week.